Well, good evening, everyone. It's good to see all of you here. Especially, I want to say hello to all of you around the world who are watching this online. We, as of today, have over 2,000 individuals who have registered for this program. And so we're excited that so many people can join live as well as being able to watch this during the next 7 days. So last time in session 1, we talked about our genetic potential. How can we reach our genetic potential? Any wellness program worth its salt, so to speak, has to address the question of exercise and diet. And today we're going to begin our discussion about exercise and diet. In fact, that discussion will never end even after the 12 weeks. Exercise and diet are critical components of an effective wellness program. So we're going to be looking at how we can actually optimize our metabolism using these two concepts. Next slide, please. We know that over 20,000 genes make up the human genome. We reviewed that last week. But in fact, we know that the choices that we make with regards to exercise and diet have been extremely well researched as to how they change the expression of those genes. It's all about, as we mentioned last session, how to turn good genes on and how to turn bad genes off. This gives us the potential to literally master our own genetic risk. Just last week, as I was excited about some new advanced cardiovascular risk indicators that had been made available to me, I went and had this much more comprehensive lab test. In fact, if you talk to the experts around the country who have done research on the risk of having a heart attack or stroke and how we can determine whether you or I right now have a high risk of having a heart attack or stroke, we recognize that only 40% of people who are going to have a heart attack or stroke can be picked up by a traditional lipid profile. In other words, a profile that looks at your total cholesterol, your LDL, bad cholesterol, your HDL, good cholesterol, and the triglycerides, or the blood fats that are floating through your bloodstream. That profile is a very powerful indicator of risk, but it only picks up 40% of the people that are going to have a heart attack or a stroke. In other words, 60% of the actual risk of having a heart attack or a stroke is missed if we do just the conventional lipid profile that is done with every yearly physical, or almost every year. Now, that's a good test, don't get me wrong. What I'm suggesting, actually what the research shows, is that you're better off flipping a coin to decide whether or not you're going to have a heart attack or stroke, compared to just doing a standard lipid profile. That brings in the importance of doing advanced risk factor biomarker testing. So I did this for myself because I've always said the best news is when you find out something new about your risk. When somebody is initially diagnosed with diabetes or some other problem with their blood work, I say, this is great news. And they look at me kind of, what are you talking about? How can this be good news? So it's good news because you've had this for many years, sometimes your whole life, if it's a genetic test or mutation. But now, finally, you know about it. And what does that imply? Once you know about it, now you have the opportunity to do something about it. Oh, but wait a minute, you might be thinking, if it's a genetic mutation, you can't do anything about that. Really? No, that's not true at all. You can do all kinds of things once you know what mutations you have, and that's why the age, the new paradigm of genomic medicine or personalized care is upon us. And we have the opportunity to take advantage of this information. So I I had this profile done, and in this profile, they did a factor V Leiden genomic mutation test. I had actually never even thought of doing that test on myself, but it was part of the profile. And as I looked at my test just less than a week ago, I discovered that I was positive for that factor V Leiden mutation. What does that mean? Well, the first thing it means is I'm a mutant. Don't laugh too loud because you're all mutants too. You just don't know what mutations you might have, or hopefully you do. Well, I already know of 2 important mutations that I have. And so I count myself fortunate that I actually know about it, so I can now do something about it. You know what? You know how that impacts my risk? See, remember, knowledge is power, but awareness is a call to action. I don't just know about the fact that I have a mutation, but I have become aware that that mutation genetically, which I have had since conception, increases my risk of having a blood clot, a pulmonary embolism, or deep vein thrombosis, any kind of blood clot, anywhere between 300 to 800%. You think it's important that I know about that? I'm not making this up, by the way. I just learned this about myself. And I am very grateful to know that. You see, the historic approach to dealing with any kind of diagnosis, and certainly a gene test, would be, woe is me. Because what can we do about a gene? Well, there's a tremendous amount of things that we can do about genes, because the genes themselves do not determine our risk. It's whether or not that gene is turned on or turned off. It's how we relate to that exposome. Okay, these epigenetic changes that reflect our exposome. And what is our exposome? It's all the things in our environment, all the choices that we make, all the lifestyle behaviors that we participate in, what we eat, what we drink, what we think, what we do. That is our exposome. Those choices, those things that we're exposed to because of our environment where we live. Those are the things that actually activate our genes one way or another, for good or for bad. And so what this 12-week series is really all about is helping us make better and better, more informed choices about our exposome, so that we shift the burden that's turning these good genes off and the bad genes on. We shift that in the opposite direction, in our favor, so that we are truly being masters of our genetic risk. So, is this part of our exposome we mentioned in session 1 is a diet that's basically primarily quick, fast food or junk food? Unfortunately, for a large segment of our society, this in fact represents a big part of our exposome, the things that are influencing our genetic destiny. Not because we have the bad genes, but because those bad genes are being turned on. Or is this our exposome? Right? But the question is that we now are understanding that our future risk of disease lies in large part on what is sitting on our plate. So we're going to be looking at the concept of diet today with regards to the concept of exercise. And I love this Nike model, just do it. I personally love to play basketball, so I always have to show this slide. I can't do that exactly. I stay back about 15 feet. But exercise is not just for sport. In fact, it's been said that if the only time you exercise is doing your sport, that sport will gradually get you out of shape. Right? Any athlete who seeks to be effective in their sport knows that they have to train and work out in order to be effective in their sport. So that's why I can't just rely on playing basketball for an hour 3 times a week. Even though that's very vigorous activity, and indeed it is good for me, I have to have a lifestyle of exercise. And so that's why when we say just do it with the people that you love, right? Get involved in exercise in a way that's enjoyable, where you're sharing that experience with others that you enjoy being with. So, but let's look at a contrast for a second. Let's look at a goal. We sent out an email last week with regards to how to set goals. And I hope that many of you were able to download that from our website, dryoungberg.com. And the idea here is that we need to learn how to set specific and measurable goals. I want to lose 30 pounds from 190 to 160 pounds over the next 4 months. Set a date. Okay, that might be one goal. Or, maybe weight's not an issue with you at all. I want to improve my blood sugar from 140 over 90 to 120 over 80, so that when I meet with my family doctor in 3 months, I have a real strong case of being able to maybe go off that medication. So those are very specific and measurable goals. And I encourage you to work on those. Today we're going to start looking at objectives that relate to those goals. You got to know where you want to be, and then you have to develop a plan on how you can most effectively get there, right? So what if one of our goals was, I want to lose 2 pounds in a week? What would it take to lose 2 pounds? Well, we know that exercise can be very effective. Here's a cartoon who was actually drawn by one of my childhood friends, Mike Baptist. I haven't seen him in over 30 years, but I always get a little laugh out of looking at the cartoons that he used to draw when we were just kids going to the village school in Barron Springs, Michigan. But this question of how we go about losing 2 pounds in 1 week reminds me of, a time many years ago, 1988. I was sitting for my doctoral defense. The chairman of my doctoral committee, Dr. David Neiman, was sitting there in the big boardroom table, and we had our own department professors and several other visiting professors had come in to pretty much quiz me. So it was a little stressful. You had to kind of be on your best behavior and kind of know what you're talking about. And this was the final step in finishing my doctorate in clinical preventive care. I was fortunate that as we went through the hour and a half, 2 hour discussion and questions and answers, that I was able, fortunately they asked all the right questions, questions that I had some information on. And as we were just finishing the deliberations, I could see that the chairman of the committee, my main mentor, Dr. Neiman, was pretty much bringing a close to the session. And out of the blue, one of our visiting professors, a friend of mine that we had been training for a marathon together, he said, "Wes, tell me, what's the most effective way to lose weight? Is it exercise or is it diet?" And I was a little bit, I was off guard now. I was, everything was pretty much done. And I've always been an exercise guy, right? I took exercise sciences through my undergraduate training. I loved exercise. I was a gymnast through college, and And I was always into sports and exercise. And so without realizing that I was still technically in the doctoral defense mode, they hadn't finished the deliberation, I, without thinking, kind of went to my primary passion, which was exercise, and I said, well, I exercise. I really believe that exercise is the most important strategy for weight loss. And as soon as I said that, I had my face turned away from the chairman of the board, the committee. As soon as I said that, I froze. And I kind of turned to my left, and I saw Dr. Neiman staring at me, kind of with his mouth open a little bit, like, you didn't just say that during the doctoral defense, did you? Now, Dr. Neiman, he was an exercise guy too. In fact, he taught exercise physiology. I'd been his graduate assistant and his teaching assistant in exercise physiology, where we taught physical therapy students and other students about the importance of exercise. But there's something really interesting on how Dr. Neiman taught his classes. He said to me one day, he says, Wes, even though we're in an exercise physiology class, do you know that 70% of what makes exercise effective in the body is really a matter of nutrition? Well, that was an interesting comment stated by an exercise physiologist. Well, Dr. Neiman is well known in the research arena for his work on the immune system, and specifically on how exhaustive exercise, like a marathon, influences exercise. Now, he had just finished an exercise study that looked at middle-aged women who were trying to lose weight. And he ran them through exercise 5 nights a week and tested their immune activity before and after the series, the 10 weeks of exercise. What he found was fascinating. He found the women who exercised regularly for 45 minutes to an hour every evening, they, at the end of the study, had an immune cell function, a natural killer cell activity that was 50% stronger than it had been at the beginning of the study. A powerful message on how important exercise is to optimize immune function. And so this was kind of the background for this. But he'd also done a study that when you exercise really hard, your immune function, your natural killer cell activity, especially if you're doing something exhaustive like a marathon, it actually drops off by 50%. In other words, too much too quick, too much too hard can be worse for you than nothing as it relates to the immune system. And so with this in mind, he stopped and to his credit, instead of making me look bad and embarrassing me, he said, okay, tell you what, why don't we actually go through the mathematics of what it takes to lose 2 pounds with exercise in 1 week, or 2 pounds in 1 week using diet. And inside, my heart was beating really rapidly, but I was smiling. He says, yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go through that. So the question here is, how much effort would it take to burn 2 pounds of fat in 1 week? So what are the questions we need to ask? Well, how many calories in a pound of fat? Anybody know? Yeah, 3,500 calories in 1 pound of fat. That's pretty concentrated energy. Right? So it's almost as if we were designed not to burn up that fat real quick. Why? Because we were initially designed not to have a lot of fat. So we want to conserve that fat that we carry. Well, the next question to ask here is what is, as we're talking about losing weight, how many calories now would we, let's do the math. This is about third grade algebra. How many calories then do we need to burn in 1 week to lose 2 pounds of fat? Thank you, 7,000. These are some of the word problems that, that we as adults haven't gone through since we were in 7th grade, right? It's kind of good to go through this to get a sense of what we're really talking about. And so essentially, we're looking at 7,000 calories in 1 week or 1,000 calories in a day. All right, so that's what we're dealing with. So how many miles then? If we want to transfer that, some of the mathematic geniuses in front already know the answer. Okay, I take a little longer to process that algebra. So how many miles would it take then to burn 2 pounds of fat? And so as you do the math, you start recognizing here that if you have about 100 calories burned per mile, which is an average, some of you already realize how many miles you're going to need to walk, jog, or run in 1 week in order to burn just 2 pounds of fat. Well, the issue here is, it looks like I'm stuck here, so I need to advance the slide. So the bottom line here, next slide, please. All right, keep going. Okay, so one of the questions here is, does it matter whether you walk briskly or slowly or jog or run a mile in terms of how many calories you burn? Well, this is really more of a question of efficiency, because whether you walk, jog, or run a mile, you're basically going to burn about the same amount of calories. The difference is that if you walk the mile real slow, it might take you 40 minutes. If you walk the mile briskly, it'll take you 20 minutes. So you're burning twice as many calories per minute, but per mile, it's about the same. Okay, so now I'm sorry, go ahead and advance to the next slide. I don't know why my clicker is, next slide. Next slide, just go ahead. Yeah, there we go. So in order to burn off 1,000 calories a day by exercise, we would literally need to, next slide, walk 70 miles or run 70 miles during that time, or 10 miles a day. Now, don't misunderstand what I'm trying to do here. I'm not trying to discourage you from using exercise as part of your wellness program. I'm trying to help you understand that there is a physiologic, not just philosophical, but physiologic difference, major difference between using exercise solely as a form of weight loss versus using diet as the main source of weight loss. Now, on the other hand, how many snacks or unnecessary food portions would I need to eliminate on a regular basis in order to accomplish the very same thing? So let's take a look at some typical snacks. More or less, these snacks represent about 250 calories each. So we're looking at about 4 snacks a day account for 1,000 calories that would represent how many miles? 10 miles of walking or jogging or running or their equivalent. So, what's the take-home message here? How long would it take us to walk even briskly that long distance, those 10 miles? How long would that take us? Roughly about 3 hours and 20 minutes, right? How long would it take us to eat those 4 snacks? Or said in another way, how much time would we save if we just avoided those 4 snacks and got rid of the 1,000 calories that way. Okay? So we can now see it. So as Dr. Neiman walked me through this 7th grade word problem, I kind of swallowed hard and wholeheartedly agreed that the easiest way to lose weight, if you had to choose one method, would be to pay attention to unnecessary food sources or snacks. Make sense? All right. Now, that being said, what about, and go ahead and just forward through this, please. I don't know why this is. If you could move the computer up, please, so that I'm actually registering. All right, move forward through this whole series. Yeah, move forward through that. There we go. All right, now, about over 30 years ago, I had a very interesting experience happen to me that helped me once and for all really appreciate the relative impact of diet and exercise, not in just fitness, but in terms of health and in terms of risk factor management. It was 1982. I was in college, halfway through my degree program at Andrews University in Barron Springs, Michigan. And it must have been a break of some kind, because my dad decided that it would be really neat if I painted the hallway. so I'm in the house painting the long hallway between the master bedroom and the kitchen. And at home, we would always listening to News Radio 78, WBBM Chicago News Radio 78. And back in the early 80s, Bob and Betty Sanders were the co-hosts of the talk show, talk radio. And my dad always liked to listen to the news and to the talk radio. So I'm painting away in the hallway, and I'm listening to Bob and Betty Sanders. Then he says, at the top of the hour, we're going to bring in Jim Fixx, who's an avid runner and marathoner, and he's promoting a big race here in Chicago. And as soon as I heard Jim Fixx, I immediately looked down the hall to the radio, and I said, I want to listen to this. Because just a year before, my father had actually bought me this complete book on running that you see on the slide. And it had a picture of Jim Fixx's running legs, muscular, lean legs. And the book was all about how to stay motivated and accountable in your exercise program. And I was very motivated, and I liked the idea of every day I could write down the type of exercise that I did, and I'd keep a little exercise journal, if you will. And I followed through that for a whole year. So I was very interested in actually hearing an interview with Jim Fixx. Well, as Jim Fixx came on, the very first thing that Betty Sanders asked him, she said, Jim, we understand that you run 10 miles every day. She paused for effect, and then she said, what kind of crazy radical person would take the time to run 10 miles every day? And I could immediately tell that this was not a favorable interview, that this was a hostile interview. And but without missing a beat, Jim Fixx says, well, Bob and Betty, tell you what, when I run 10 miles a day, I can eat anything I want. And then you could picture there Bob and Betty, radio people, sitting there with their Diet Coke and their hamburger and their fries and probably 50 pounds overweight, right? And what are they going to say to that? It was an awesome comeback. And I remember my initial reaction was just to laugh out loud as I'm looking down the hallway while I'm painting the hallway again. But then immediately I realized that there was a big problem with what Jim had just said. Because you see, you can't just eat anything you want. It's not a question of weight, folks. In fact, the main issue with wellness is not weight. It really never has been. It seems that almost everybody is interested in weight and they want to focus on weight. And there's nothing wrong with setting goals for appropriate weight loss or weight gain as it might be. But just because somebody is perfectly lean and doesn't have an ounce of excess fat in their body, in no way suggests that that person is healthy. Society has kind of set some guidelines that really aren't based in evidence. And so I remember turning to the radio and saying, Jim, you're going to have problems. Now, I wasn't a researcher at this time. I hadn't done much training, but just intuitively I understood there was a problem. 2 years later, I am now at Loma Linda University in my first year of professional training. I just finished my last class of the day, and I jump in my car, and I'm racing back home, and the top of the hour news comes on. And what I hear causes my heart to skip a beat. Jim Fixx, promoter of countless marathons, author of many books on running, found dead this morning. A lone cyclist came upon his body at 5:30 in the morning, halfway through his 10-mile run. He had collapsed and died on the scene. The running world, the fitness world was stunned. How could Jim Fixx, somebody who seems so fit, die of a massive heart attack? The first thing that crossed my mind after that newscast was over is remembering just 2 years earlier when Jim had said to Betty, says, when I run 10 miles a day, I can eat anything I want. Now, it was true in one sense. When he exercised that much, he didn't have to worry about what he ate in terms of weight. He was burning off all that weight, no problem. But see, when it comes to cardiovascular risk, you can't just burn off cardiovascular risk. You can burn off some of it. You can burn off a chunk of it, but you can't burn off most of it. Cholesterol, after all, is not a caloric substance. It's a waxy substance that when in excess and when associated with other toxic molecules, infiltrates the artery wall, and that stimulates an inflammatory reaction that leads to significant inflammation and atheroma or plaque buildup within the artery wall. That's the cause of heart disease. That's the cause of stroke risk. Now, Jim's story is actually a very interesting story. When he was a young man, in his early 20s, his father died of a massive heart attack. This led Jim to a state of depression. He had been an athlete in high school and college, and he started just being a couch potato. He started just drinking multiple beers every night, smoking several packs of cigarettes a day. Just wasn't feeling good, was depressed. Well, one day, a friend of his who had been an athlete buddy of his said, "Jim, there's a 10K. Why don't we actually train for this 10K and do it together?" So Jim thought, well, okay. There is power of inviting somebody into an exercise program. Some people will never start a wellness program unless they're invited to it. The power of community, the power of doing something socially with somebody else. Well, he actually noticed that as he was training for this 10K, he was feeling better. Depression was starting to lift. He just had more energy. and it was fun, it was social, and pretty soon, as he got more and more active in running, he realized, well, what am I smoking for? I'm not going to be able to reach my potential if I'm smoking. So he gave up smoking. You know, it's not just giving it up because it's bad for runners. It's just like, if you're running, you don't feel like smoking as much. When you actually are doing something good for you that manages stress, now you don't have to smoke a cigarette, which is your stress management strategy. You can't give something up, even if it's bad for you, unless you first replace it with something that is equally effective for what you're getting from that bad thing, but is actually good for you. And that's where exercise comes in very powerfully. It can really help people give up other addictions. Well, then he became a good friend of Dr. Kenneth Cooper. Dr. Cooper of the Aerobics Institute fame in Dallas, Texas, who started many exercise programs. He was famous for getting the Dallas Cowboys with Coach Tom Landry. The coach was upset that his Cowboys were basically falling apart during the fourth quarter. He says, what do we need to do? And he says, well, you need to get them in an aerobic exercise program. All you're doing is these guys are buffing out with weights. They're never going to last more than 2 or 3 quarters. They need to start exercising longer distance. And so sure enough, he got him, all the Dallas Cowboys out there, and guess what? They became known as Dallas Cowboys, the fourth quarter team, the team that would always come back and win. It was because of Dr. Kenneth Cooper and his insights into the importance of endurance, building endurance with aerobic exercise. In 1976, I had the privilege to sit in and listen to Dr. Cooper give a presentation at Andrews University. I was just in high school at the time. But I wanted to hear this great man give this presentation. And I remember something that he said, to where, of course, he was talking about the power of exercise. He says, yeah, you don't just do a resting stress test or a resting EKG test on somebody to determine whether their heart's healthy or not. What do? You get them on a treadmill, then hook them up to an EKG, and then stress their heart, and then you're much more likely to see if their heart can handle stress properly. If you have a high blood pressure response during the exercise test, that's predictive of somebody developing high blood pressure even at rest 5 years later. I remember as he was explaining this all the way back in 1976. Wonderful lecture. And then at the end, somebody in the back raised their hand. He said, Dr. Cooper, what about diet? Does it matter what you eat? And Dr. Cooper very authoritatively said, as long as your exercise output in calories equals your caloric input in food calories, you're good. But then when news reached Dr. Cooper that one of his best friends, Jim Fix, had died of a massive heart attack, one of the fittest men that he knew, he started thinking about that old paradigm. It doesn't really matter what you eat as long as you balance it, as long as you control your intake, as long as you exercise enough to prevent weight gain. See, that is simply never been true, just that we didn't know it up until a few years ago. So that's when Dr. Cooper decided to start paying attention to nutrition. He wrote the book Running Without Fear because everybody was afraid. He said, oh, you got to have a doctor's appointment if you're going to start an exercise program. Really? So anytime you do anything healthy, you first got to get cleared by your doctor? So that's ridiculous. You can run without fear. We need to be doing exercise more often, but not necessarily hard. So that's when Dr. Roy Vardavedian, actually a friend of mine and colleague, who was several years ahead of me, he was hired by Dr. Cooper to run their lifestyle medicine center. And he brought in this concept of nutrition to balance the importance of exercise to control cardiovascular risk, health risk in general. He did such a good job on that he was actually able to write a book called NutriPoints. NutriPoints is a bestseller that showed how you can categorically choose the very best foods that optimize your ability to change your genes in a positive direction. Well, Jim probably extended his life by many years by exercising on a regular basis. The sad part is, though, that Jim could still be around today, even running his 10 miles if he wants, if he would have paid attention to what we know now about the power of diet, that his fate certainly rested largely on his plate. But does that mean that if we just eat an optimal diet, we're good? No, absolutely not, right? I frequently ask the question, what's more important between exercise and diet? And, my initial response is, the one you're not doing, that's the most important one. You need to have both of them. These are two risk factors, or two wellness strategies, rather, that are critical to health. So we know that simply exercising on a regular basis cuts your risk of a heart attack by 50%. If you do have a heart attack, it increases your potential to fully recover from that heart attack by another 70%. So exercise is powerful. It lowers your risk of having it, and it dramatically decreases your risk of that being a fatal heart attack if you do have it. Why? Because exercise stimulates what we call collateral circulation. It stimulates the growth of the development of new blood vessels, the growth of new blood vessels around areas that might be a little bit blocked off, that might not be pumping blood adequately. So that collateral circulation dramatically improves health and the potential of surviving even a heart attack. So we know it lowers blood fats. In fact, exercise is powerful in lowering the triglyceride blood fats, which are caloric. It naturally increases the good cholesterol, the cholesterol that actually sucks up the plaque out of the arteries and actually moves it to the liver where the liver can get rid of it. You know what the number one way is to help the liver get rid of toxic LDL cholesterol? Is to make sure that every meal that you consume has at least 10, preferably 15 grams of whole food fiber. So one of the strategies that you can write down in your objective right now is that the goal is to, in time, reading the right books, looking at the right charts, figure out what foods you need to consume in order to get an average of 10 to 15 grams of fiber per meal, preferably 15. The beauty of that is that it forces you to bring in whole plant-based foods, because animal products of any kind have zero fiber in them. And so you have to focus on what we call first-class foods, and we'll be getting into that in a little bit. Other benefits of exercise is it dramatically improves digestion. We're going to have a whole session in this 12-week series on how to optimize digestion. This is critical, folks, because most people don't realize that they have maldigestion, and that is one of the main reasons they are breaking down health-wise. If you don't have a real healthy digestion, you're just simply not going to be healthy, and you're going to be speeding the aging process in your body. You have to absorb the nutrients and assimilate the healthy vitamins and minerals and other nutrients if you expect to be healthy. That's critical. So it enhances the absorption of minerals. Some studies say up to 30%. Exercising immediately after a meal, lightly, moderately, not so that you're huffing and puffing. Just go out and exercise lightly immediately after most meals, and that dramatically improves digestion. It's one of the most powerful strategies for somebody who has struggles with blood sugars, a pre-diabetic or a diabetic individual, can lower their blood sugars anywhere from 1 to 3 points for every minute they walk immediately after finishing a meal. Why immediately? Because if you wait an hour, your blood sugars have now reached the very peak that they're going to reach, and it's already starting to damage the body. So you can't wait an hour. You do it immediately, so you blunt that peak dramatically, and it also decreases the risk of your blood sugars dropping too rapidly at 2, 3, or 4 hours. It balances your blood sugars nicely. It lowers inflammation. It improves, as we said, digestion. It helps you extract vitamins and nutrients and minerals from the foods that you're consuming. It lowers inflammation, as measured by the cardiac CRP blood test, by 30% all by itself. By the way, that's the same level that taking a statin medication lowers inflammation. Same level. And we'll be talking more about cholesterol strategies next session. Anytime you lower inflammation, you dramatically lower the potential plaque buildup within the artery walls. We know exercise, of course, done at any time of the day is going to help control blood sugars. And as we discussed in session 1, 1 out of 2 of us who are age 40 to 59 already have prediabetes. 90% of us don't know it. That's why we need to get tested for that. And a fasting blood sugar is inadequate. Has to be a glucose tolerance test. There's a lot more information about that in the website, dryoungberg.com, that shows you how a glucose tolerance can be done and effectively evaluated to establish your risk. If you're between ages of 60 to 74, already 2 out of 3 of you have at least prediabetes. Again, the vast majority of you in that category do not know that you have it. And if you're over age 75, it's a 3 out of 4, 75% chance that you already have at least prediabetes. Okay, so that's one of the in fact, the insulin resistance syndrome associated with prediabetes and diabetes is the #1 risk factor for premature heart disease. So we're going to be emphasizing that throughout the series. Now, when it comes to dealing with exercise, we talked earlier about the impact of exercise on weight loss. But you see, exercise has a powerful ability to change the way you feel. You know why they call it disease? It's because it places you in a state of dis-ease. You just don't feel right. Something's wrong. Something's missing. And when something's missing in your life, where do you find yourself ending up? What can I eat that changes the way I feel? I want to feel better. I want to feel different. Just anything but how I feel right now. Right? That's a big problem of dis-ease. And, if you feel that way, guess what? You're probably going to succumb to a choice that isn't really that good for you. I know, I've been there. Exercise is one of the best ways to change the way you feel. Going back to that doctoral oral examination that I had, I really still feel, now I can say it because, that's all done. I really feel that exercise is a critical part of a wellness program, and that if you don't exercise properly, I dare say that most people are not going to eat effectively. Why? Because exercise is what gives you that feeling of wellness that allows you then to eat the foods that optimize genetic expression even further. So let me tell you a little story about myself. This must have been about 8-9 years ago, when I was in Guam. And in Guam, I was the director of the lifestyle medicine programs. And almost every evening, we were doing a program of some kind. We had a 6-month-long program called New Start that focused on intensive lifestyle medicine strategies, where we did extensive labs before, and then at 2 weeks, and then at 3 months and 6 months. So we knew exactly what was going on. We checked blood sugars every day before and after meals, before and after exercise, to make sure that we were optimizing. We figured out what the best meal plan, what the best exercise program, what the best overall strategy was for each individual. And I, as I mentioned earlier, I love to play basketball. But this one week, the Tuesday and Thursday lunchtime that I normally played basketball, I got caught up in meetings at the clinic, and so I missed that, and then I got busy in my other work, and I ended up going a whole week without a significant form of exercise. Oh, I went for walks with my patients. I got a little bit of exercise, but not the type of exercise that really I needed to optimize my training effect. So after a week of essentially very little activity and no real exercise, I got up early that Sunday morning and went to play basketball. And I was so excited, looking forward to playing. I was stir crazy. I was in a state of dis-ease. I needed some exercise. And I enjoyed it so much that instead of just playing for an hour, I played for 3 hours. Full court basketball, hardcore basketball. I was famished. I was sweating. I got home and I was just exhausted. And I ate a meal and rehydrated. 20 minutes later, I'm back at the refrigerator. I'm not satisfied. There's something missing. So I'm eating more food, even though I just ate 20 minutes ago. I'm barely even beginning digesting the food I ate earlier. But I just was insatiable. The rest of the day, my wife was so upset at me. Where are you, honey? She was so upset at me because I was essentially worthless. All the little, honey-do lists, were basically uncrossed out that day. I just laid on the couch and watched football and slept because I was so exhausted. But every 45 minutes to an hour, I would get up and I would be drawn to the refrigerator. And at that point, I didn't really care what I ate. I just wanted to eat something. The next night, Monday night, I have a lifestyle medicine lecture to give. My wellness chef prepared a wonderful meal for the whole group of patients. I got my meal and I ate it, enjoyed it. But it was still feeling like I was dissatisfied. Tuesday night came around. For 3 days, I'm just eating, and I just can't feel satisfied. Tuesday night, I give a very important talk on nutrition. First-class foods. My chef, knowing that and patients want to talk to me afterwards, I'm probably not going to eat right away. She prepared a meal for me ahead of time and said, Dr. Youngberg, here's your meal. Go ahead and eat it right now. I'll close the door, and then you can give a lecture. So I ate my meal. Then the patients went through the line and got their big salad and ate all their first-class foods that are shown medically in studies to provide first-class health. They listened to the lecture, took notes, and appreciated the great information. After that lecture, an hour and a half later, the chef came up to me and says, I can tell you're still hungry by the way you're looking at the food in the back. Here's another plate. I eat another plate of food. Immediately after eating that second dinner, an hour and a half apart, I'm driving home. It's probably 8:30, 8:45 at night. And I'm driving on Marine Corps Drive, which is actually 3 lanes on both sides with a middle lane, so it's 7 lanes. And I always drive in a very far right-hand lane. Why? Because I look at the moonlit bay shimmering to the right. I'm just driving along watching it. But as I'm driving, I catch a little reflection of a sign at a gas station that I had never stopped at in 7 years. Well, if you're paying attention to the picture on the screen, it was a Dairy King. DQ. And immediately my brain flashed back 30-some years earlier, when as a 12-year-old I'd ride my bike to the local DQ in town and get a peanut butter parfait. I had no idea if they even made such an archaic thing as a peanut butter parfait. I had it when I was a little kid. So as soon as I saw that reflection out of the corner of my left eye, I immediately cranked the wheel to the left, went across 7 lanes of traffic, bounced over the driveway, parked and then walked in, opened the door, and I said, "Young lady, do you still make peanut butter parfaits?" And she said, "We certainly do." And I said, "I'd like one, please." And she went and made it, and I'm just salivating. I hadn't had one in at least 20 years. Hadn't even thought of having one. I slurped that thing down in less than 2 minutes flat, enjoying every gooey, sweet taste. And within another minute or two, I was starting to feel that head rush. And I'm starting to think to myself, what just happened? What happened? What happened to my resolve? What happened to the fact that I was a wellness doctor? What happened to the fact that I'd just given a lecture on nutrition to people who looked up to me and really wanted to follow the plan that I had outlined for them? What happened? Well, I could beat myself up about the poor willpower that I showed that night. You know what? That wasn't a question of willpower. That was a question of poor planning. This is a very important principle. If you or I do not plan and exercise appropriately throughout the week, and then we do something even stupider, like exercising vigorously, exhaustively for many hours, what do you expect? That your body's just going to bounce back and be okay with that? No, your body's going to go through a significant trauma. And when trauma occurs to the body, we tend to lose control. See, the frontal lobe was placed in our brain so that we would have control. It's critical that we make sure that we are making good choices and setting ourselves up so that we can be effective when presented with a temptation. It's incredibly critical that we learn to be consistent with our wellness program. Being a weekend warrior or a weekend wellness expert is not going to cut it. In fact, you may be shortening your life by doing that. You may be increasing your risk for a heart attack or stroke. We need to be consistent day in and day out. Developing a plan like that is incredibly critical. Now, later on this week, I'm going to send out to all who have registered for this seminar an email that includes a handout that talks about how to set limits. This is really critical because it's not really popular in today's society to set limits. But I want to suggest to you that sometimes we have to say no to things we really want to do in order to say yes to the very best of things. We want to really accomplish optimal health. We have to become very good at setting limits. And so I'm going to be sending that handout to you so you can start understanding that the most effective people in business, in health, or in any walk of life are the ones that understand how to set limits. And if we can learn to be consistent with that, I guarantee you that you will, over time, be able to reach your goals. Thank you very much, and make sure that you enjoy this journey of wellness that you're in. right now. All right, now we move over to the part of the program where we can have interaction from the audience and, of course, even our online audience. We have questions that have come in from the online audience as well as from the audience here. So those of you who are interested here to ask questions, please move over to my left, and we'll be able to take your questions.
Okay, for the next 20 minutes, we want to take some questions and answers. And at this moment, the first question comes from Tara. What role can 1-a-day style vitamins play in improving one's health? For example, will folate obtained from a vitamin pill benefit me in any way?
All right, that's a great question. So what role does a 1-a-day vitamin play in potentially impacting health? Well, as of late, there's been some interesting studies suggesting that taking vitamins might actually be bad for you, and that might actually increase your risk for cancer. And there's actually truth to that. But that's why we have to understand what is going on in your health and what your risk factors are, and actually what's going on in your genetic risk factors. For instance, if you have a gene mutation, which is very common, called the MTHFR mutation, which stands for methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. Say that real fast. Okay? This is essentially a gene that codes for an enzyme that is supposed to activate or methylate folate, or the otherwise known as folic acid. But folic acid is actually a synthetic form of folate. They're not the same thing. Folic acid is synthetic, and most vitamins use folic acid. Studies have suggested that in some women, using a supplement that includes the synthetic folic acid rather than the folate actually can increase the risk of certain cancers up to 30%. And so the latest information suggests that we need to move away from using synthetic nutrients, just like we want to move away from using synthetic anything if we can. We want to use whole, natural products. We don't want to use foods that are made to look and taste and smell like good and tasty, healthy food, when in fact is just a bunch of chemicals that were put together in a laboratory. See, this is one of the big problems with fast food, is that fast food is largely a food that has been engineered to look, smell, and taste that way. And it's just a bunch of chemicals. And so the short answer, by the way, the short answer is that a natural vitamin mineral supplement is almost always good for individuals. I take a vitamin mineral supplement every day. I have my whole regimen that I follow. But it has to be personalized. You can't just go and oh, that looks good, and that looks good. That's why blood testing and laboratory testing is so important, because it'll let you know whether you have certain mutations that really make it important to stay away from folic acid, for instance. Because if you have that MTHFR mutation, folic acid, especially when in elevated levels, can actually impair good health. But there's no question that various vitamins and minerals can dramatically improve risk depending on the situation.
Thank you. This question comes from the Philippines. Salim asked the question, for those that are unable to sweat because of being for so long in a homeostatic environment, same ambient temperature in the house, work, school, how can an epigenetic intervention help to sweat regularly again?
All right, Salim, how you doing in the Philippines? Salim just graduated from Loma Linda University and now is in the Philippines. So I'm glad that you have a group watching in the Philippines. It's been said that the fitter that somebody is, the more they sweat during exercise, and the sooner they get into sweating during exercise. Now, that's a general statement. There's always an exception to every rule. But is it good to sweat? Well, not if you're giving a presentation in front of a whole bunch of people, right? Right? But if you're exercising, or if you're sitting in an infrared sauna, or you want to sweat, because sweating actually removes toxins out of your body. Even heavy metal toxins are removed by sweating. Studies have demonstrated that over and over again. So generals of the past, Alexander the Great said, my main goal for my army is that they exercise hard enough to break a sweat every day. It's important to have a sweat every day. Now, how are you going to do that in today's world? The vast majority of us are not going to be able to sweat unless we actually have a planned, goal-driven exercise program. So the main way to epigenetically optimize the opportunity for sweating is to get out there and exercise on a regular basis. If that in itself doesn't work, then I would be going to a clinician and evaluating thyroid function. If your thyroid is really low, then you may not be able to sweat well, okay? Because thyroid regulates body temperature. And so you want to optimize thyroid appropriately. So there's a couple ideas there.
Okay, very good. This is a question from Karen. She doesn't say where she's from, but she wrote, and she says, how do you present this to someone who wants you to do this for them instead of doing it for themselves?
All right, so read that again. That was an interesting question.
Yes, so it has to do with all these tips that we're getting. How do you present this to someone who wants you to do this for them instead of doing it for themselves?
Well, that old adage, you can bring a horse to water, but you can't force the horse to drink. I understand, I resonate with that question. There's some people in our lives where we just wish so much that they would take better care of themselves. We love them, and we want what's best for them. But see, when it comes to health, as it is in many other areas, unless an individual personally acts out of their own desire and conviction, it's not going to happen. That's why I say that every person is the chairman or the chairwoman of the board of their own health. We cannot dictate health to somebody else. Governments will try to dictate health to the masses. It's always failed. Church groups have tried to dictate health. That's always failed. Individuals or family members have frequently tried to dictate health and what people should do. That doesn't work. The only thing that works is if somebody becomes convicted by becoming aware of their own risk. That's why I really feel so strongly about the power of personal testing. Because remember when I was 24 years old, I thought I was Mr. Health. I didn't have to do anything different because I was just healthy. No matter what I did, I was healthy, right? And then that's when I had my cholesterol checked, and my cholesterol was 244 at the age of 24. That forever popped my Mr. Fitness bubble, and it helped humble me and make me focused on what was most important, and that is being aware of your own personal risk. Stop worrying about everybody else. Stop worrying about the speck in somebody else's eye. Make sure you get the board out of your own eye first. Okay? And you know what? When we live that way, when we make sure that we're taking care of our own risk and optimizing our own health, what happens is that other people that we love, that we care for, are paying attention. And if we do it with the right motivation in mind, that will begin to win them over. So that's what I would say. So let's just focus on encouraging people through our own action, okay, and love them even if they don't follow our lead.
Okay. Penny asks the following question. I have 4 children, and the third child ended up with diabetes. Yes, both sides of the grandparents had it as well. She is vegan and controls her diabetes very well. Is there a way to reverse it or to at least get her off insulin?
All right, great question. Where's that from?
She just said Penny. She
All
didn't
right,
mention where
well,
she's
Penny from somewhere. That's actually the reason that I wrote the book Goodbye Diabetes. Even though really the book is focusing on how to optimize metabolism, how to really bring metabolic harmony back to the body so that everything improves, that state of dis-ease changes, where we feel good. That's really what the concept of the book Goodbye Diabetes really should be titled Goodbye Health Problems. Hello Optimal Wellness, right? But that book especially is beneficial for somebody who has diabetes, who wants to figure out what is missing in their plan to optimize their potential, to get their blood sugars to such a healthy level that their doctor is going to have no choice but to take them off the medication, or at minimum, decrease the medication. When we run our comprehensive lifestyle medicine programs, where people with diabetes are, they're taking 100, 200 units of insulin. If we don't cut their insulin, according to medical protocol, if we don't cut their insulin by at least 50% on that first day, they're at risk of ending up in the hospital with low blood sugars. The power of lifestyle medicine is unmatched. Nothing, no medication is going to be able to accomplish what you can do through comprehensive lifestyle medicine, especially when it deals with chronic diseases like diabetes, hypertension, heart disease, etc. And so the good news is that the vast majority of individuals are able to, at minimum, dramatically cut back on their medications very quickly, within days, if they're following a comprehensive program. But that means we need to pay attention not just to the things we have been doing. Some of us are really good about doing some things, and that's good for us. But we need to ask the question, what more can I do to optimize my health? That's really my model. Okay, that I want to learn more about my risk. I want to find another mutation that I have, because as I do that, now I know that I can improve my health by intervening on that gene, bypassing it with a nutritional strategy. It's really possible.
I don't know if there's anybody in our audience who has a question. This would be the moment to come up and just come here to the side. I'm going to ask one more question before we get our audience to share. When it comes to exercise, what is the minimum that we need to be doing for those who don't do much? What is the minimum?
Okay, I know it's not you, Pastor Sam, because he's an avid bodyboarder and racquetball player. But so yeah, what's the minimum? Kind of reminds me of some other questions. What's the least that I can do and pass this class? Right? I've asked that question before. I understand it. But here's the challenge. That's actually a very risky question to be asking, because there's a lot of things about our health that we don't know. One of the greatest benefits of following a comprehensive lifestyle medicine strategy is not necessarily because it helps us reach our goal of our known risk. They say, I want to lower my weight this much, or I want to get my blood pressure under control. I want to even get my blood sugars under perfect control. Getting the blood pressure and the blood sugars under perfect control, a wonderful goal, but it actually may not be the most important thing for you right now. But the lifestyle medicine strategy that helped you accomplish that may actually be completely changing another situation that you're completely unaware of that is really your biggest nemesis. That's what I call the serendipity factor, the value of lifestyle medicine impacting every aspect of our health, even the areas that we don't know about. And so when we ask the question, what's the minimum I can do, we might be short-circuiting or minimizing the potential to accomplish something far of more importance than just accomplishing a blood sugar or blood pressure reduction. So, but I guess the standard answer would be 20 minutes a day, at least 3 times to 4 times a week. Most people don't do that. So if you do that, you're way ahead of the curve. You're way ahead of most people. Let me suggest to you that the people who've actually been able to reverse out-of-control diabetes in less than 7 weeks or 8 weeks are the ones who don't ask that question, are the ones who ask, what is everything that I can do? I want to bring it all together. Comprehensive strategies. And they're the people that don't just manage their health. They don't just manage their disease process. They don't just improve it a little bit. They're the ones that actually completely control it and dramatically improve and transform their health. So, and I'm not suggesting, by the way, that, we should be, exercising 3 hours and 20 minutes every day. That's not necessary. But in a world where we get very little true physical activity, it would be very worthwhile if we planned to get at least 10, maybe 15 minutes after most meals. And we'll learn why that's so critical in future sessions. And then include some type of aerobic component where you're getting sweaty, which is some other time of the day where you're planning to exercise harder and get a training effect. And then once or twice a week doing something that's resistance training. All done very gradually. And you know what that will do? That will allow you to age gracefully and optimally. Okay, now next question.
Yeah, my name is Gio from Texas. Mine's on the other end of the spectrum. You mentioned in a slide, if I heard you correctly, at what point does the exercise, and how can I find out for myself, is it negatively affecting my immune system? I just started running and I started increasing my distance. So how would I figure out that, now I'm too far and my immune is being compromised?
That's a great question. And fortunately, my actual doctoral dissertation was based on doing research on ultra-marathon runners. It was my major professor, Dr. David Neiman, was heading up that project. And he actually recruited 10 of the fittest individuals in Southern California. These are individuals that would think nothing of just saying, hey, Joe, you want to go run 35 miles up in the foothills? Oh, yeah, I got time. And they would actually go run in the mountains for 35 minutes. 35 miles. It's been a long day. And literally, I mean, they were hardcore. I got to know these individuals because they were, they came in regularly for the research portion. And, but see, these are very unique individuals. The rule of thumb is that if you increase your exercise intensity or duration more than 10% per week, you are risking putting too much stress on your system. The key with exercise is just do it and do it regularly, but take your time at increasing the duration or the intensity of the exercise. I would rather you exercise too slowly or even at a lower intensity much longer than take the risk of getting injured or actually depressing your immune system. The rule here is that if you exercise in such a way that you feel tired later on in the day, you feel tired maybe the next day, you're just like, just something's missing, something's not right. You got to look back to your exercise, think maybe I did too much. In other words, listen to your body. Everybody's different. For a type of exercise that might be excruciating for one, it's just a walk in the park for somebody else. You need to pay attention to your situation right now. The key is to do something on a regular basis multiple times a day. And it begins with light activity right after meals. The rule of thumb for exercising intensely is to do it at a point where it's somewhat hard, where you can you're breathing hard, you're sweating, but you can still talk a little bit. If you can whistle, you're probably not at your training heart rate. If you can't talk and you're out of breath, you may be pushing it a little bit too hard. Now, this is for the general individual. Athletes need to learn how to push a little bit, but also listen to their bodies. Athletes become experts at listening to their bodies, and that usually relates to how they feel later on that day, the next day.
Hi, my name is Yolanda. I've had diabetes type 2 for about 13 years, and I had a stroke.
When did you have your stroke, Yolanda?
A year and a half
Okay.
ago. And I have MTHFR, the homozygous type T677, I believe. Anyway, I'm taking the Deplin. When they told me I had the homozygous type of the MTHFR, they gave me Deplin. And ever since I started taking the Deplin, my blood sugars have been high, and I can't seem to get them down.
Okay. All right. So you want to know what can you do about this situation?
Yes.
So the question is, okay, there was a stroke. She discovered that she had a homozygous mutation to the MTHFR. So welcome. We're fellow mutants. Welcome to the club. But the homozygous means you actually have two copies. You have one copy from the mother, one copy from the father, which means that there's a greater greater decrease in the ability of each cell to activate folate or to detoxify properly, to repair DNA, and so forth. The reason this MTHFR mutation is even available at standard labs is because cardiologists recognize that mutation is strongly associated with forming clots that cause strokes and heart attacks. That's why I think everybody should be tested for that. There's many simple ways to do that. So the issue here is that what do we do about that mutation? So one option is taking Deplin. Now, Deplin is at minimum 7,500 micrograms of methylfolate or 15,000 micrograms of methylfolate. That might be pushing it. Well, in fact, I usually don't go that high, and what I do is look at the broader picture. I would first start by decreasing your total intake of methylfolate, and then expand your strategies for limiting your risk of clotting by looking at the big picture. Really, so you're in the right place. That's really what we're talking about here. This 12-week series is all about how to optimize the synergy by taking advantage of every strategy and filling in the gaps wherever they are, not just what we see as a major gap like a homozygous 677 MTHFR mutation. It's an important mutation, but my father has a worse one than you do. He's got the heterozygous compound mutation, which is a 90% defect in the ability to activate folate. But so we can nutritionally bypass that, but we want to do it prudently, and we want to figure out the other strategies. So there's definitely things that you can do by looking at the bigger picture to help you accomplish your goals. You're in the right place.
We want to thank our audience and those who are watching online for sharing your questions. And Dr. Youngberg, when are we having our next meeting?
Okay, next session is next Monday night. And you will be, anybody who's registered, you're going to get an email. In fact, you're going to get several emails this week that look at the handout on how to set limits. None of us like to set limits, and most of us refuse, including myself, to set limits unless we have a really good reason. Okay, you got to give me a really good reason, or I'm not going to set any limits. Okay, and so throughout this series, we will give you those reasons so that you can joyfully set limits and basically be able to succeed and accomplish your wellness goals because of setting the right limits, setting your borders appropriately. So with that, I bid you good night, and we'll see you again in the next session.